Mr. Tiger. I was informed that prosecution has had spent 7 hours and 35 minutes so far. Thus, remaining time would be about 25 minutes. Do you think you can finish the closing argument within that time period? If we extend a bit
Yes,
more
Mr.
for
President,
today.
I do. If within that 225, we do think so.
So I propose to sit 1 hour, 15 minutes each for the remaining session, thereby extending the sitting in total about half an hour. Yes, Ms. Peck, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honours. I'm going to address you on the joint criminal enterprise to eliminate the Bosnian Muslim population in Srebrenica. Your Honours, Karadžić bears criminal responsibility for the murders of over 7,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys and the serious harm suffered by thousands of Bosnian Muslim men, women, and children. Karadžić bears criminal responsibility for genocide. By the night of 11 July 1995, he and Mladic were setting up the structures and means to implement their aim, to eliminate and destroy the Bosnian Muslim population in Srebrenica. Over 7,000 Muslim men and boys were summarily executed in 4 days, and the rest of the population, women, young children, and elderly men, forcibly removed from the Srebrenica enclave in 2 days. These operations were deliberate. They were calculated, well organized. Your Honours, in his brief and during this trial, Karadžić has attempted to belittle the power and influence he exercised in July 1995. But the truth is, he was president and supreme commander of the armed forces. He oversaw the Srebrenica operations. He directed the Srebrenica operations, and he authorized and approved every significant step along the way. He had authority and control over every institution of state involved in the murders and the forcible removal of everyone else. He had authority and control over the army, the police, and the local civilian authorities. They reported to him throughout the Srebrenica operations. He was kept informed throughout the Srebrenica operations. His authority ensured they cooperated and coordinated their actions. His authority ensured that no one ever investigated the murders during his reign in power, that the crimes were covered up, the bodies reburied, and the international community kept out until it was too late. Karadžić's defense is that he didn't know anything, and therefore he didn't intend anything. He says the plan to kill only emerged on the 13th July after the murders at Kravica warehouse. Then he blames Bejara and Mladic and the VRS main staff. Your Honours, Bejara and Mladic's guilt, and they are guilty, does not exculpate Karadžić. Your Honours, first, I'm going to address Karadžić's claims that he didn't know or intend anything. In so doing, I will discuss some of his significant contributions to the joint criminal enterprise to eliminate. This is also evidence from which you can infer his criminal intent. And Your Honours, I refer you to the prosecution brief, paragraphs 876 to 1069, in which we set out all of Karadžić's significant contributions to the joint criminal enterprise to eliminate the Bosnian Muslims in Srebrenica, and paragraphs 1096 to 1100, where we address his genocidal intent. Second, I'll deal with three incredible claims made by the defense: that Karadžić's conduct was exemplary, that he didn't know about the mass executions until years after the war, that there was no plan to kill the Muslim men and boys until after the murders at Kravica warehouse. Third, I'll address the arguments about the numbers of Muslim men who were murdered. Fourth, as requested by the Chamber, I will deal with the interplay between the overarching JCE and the JCE to eliminate. Fifth, some of Karadžić's arguments on the count of forcible transfer in relation to Srebrenica. And finally, I will come back to the count of genocide related to Srebrenica. Your Honours, first let me go back to before 1995. Karadžić had long sought the removal of the Bosnian Muslim population from the Srebrenica area. We see that in Directive 4, which Karadžić approved. I refer you to the prosecution brief at paragraphs 414 to 419 and the Appendix A, the Podrinier summary, at paragraphs 2 to 3. By Directive 7, Karadžić ordered a sustained attack upon the civilian population of the Srebrenica enclave through deprivation and fear and the disablement of their UN protectors. That's the Podrinier summary, paragraphs 21 to 29. On the 28th of May 1995, Karadžić ordered Mladić to prepare to seize the Srebrenica enclave. Then he approved a full-scale military attack. On 8th July, he ordered Karadžić to go, quotes, full steam ahead. That's P4484. And on 9 July, he ordered the attack and takeover of Srebrenica town itself. That's P2276. Karadžić intended to force the Bosnian Muslim population out of the Srebrenica enclave. On the afternoon of 11 July, as the army entered Srebrenica, Guerrero, a main staff officer, called Karadžić twice to report. First, everything is going according to plan and do not worry. Then, that's P4629. Then 20 minutes later, Mr. President, Serbian silver, Serbian church, and Serbian flag. That's P4630. Guerrero was reporting there was a Serbian flag flying in Srebrenica. Karadžić knew the moment Srebrenica fell. The prosecution brief, paragraphs 887 to 891. That night, he and Mladić were setting up the structures and means to implement a new common plan in relation to Srebrenica, the joint criminal enterprise to eliminate the Bosnian Muslims in Srebrenica by killing all the men and boys and forcibly removing the remaining population. With this aim, Karadžić's long-standing intent to remove the Bosnian Muslim population evolved. The Muslim men were to be marked out, separated from their families, and executed. Karadžić intended to kill them. Karadžić intended to destroy the Bosnian Muslim population in Srebrenica. That intent, his genocidal intent, may be inferred from his actions and his words, his authority and control over everyone involved in the Srebrenica operations, his approval and authorization of his subordinates' actions at every significant turn, his significant contributions to the joint criminal enterprise to eliminate the Bosnian Muslim population in Srebrenica. Karadžić directed the Srebrenica operations, and on 13 July, he ordered that Bosnian Muslim men be moved from Bratunac to Zvornik, where they were murdered out of sight. That's the prosecution brief, paragraphs 959 to 966. Your Honours, on 12 July in Potachari, the harrowing separation of Muslim men and boys from their family members began. These separations were an intrinsic part of the murder and forcible transfer operations. But I'll come back to this. On 13 July, Karadžić spoke to Mladić by telephone sometime between 5 and 6:40 p.m. The call was witnessed and photographed. Mladić was in the field. He reported that Srebrenica was done. He was reporting to Karadžić that the forcible removal operation was done. It was. The report was accurate. They talked about promoting Karadžić, and Karadžić was promoted just before 8 that night to commander of the Drina Corps. Karadžić issued a decree on the following day. That's the prosecution brief, paragraphs 949 to 954. Earlier in the afternoon, at 3:50, Karadžić had met with Tomislav Kovač, his acting or deputy minister of the Interior and commander of the police forces command staff. I refer to the prosecution brief, paragraphs 941 to 8. It was a 20-minute meeting. Kovač left at 4:10. Then he went straight to the field. He met Mladić in Vlasenica. This is less than 100 kilometers from Pale. You can see on the map P4941, page 5. So Karadžić's subordinates, the head of the police and the head of the army, met on the 13th July in Vlasenica after Kovač had met with Karadžić in Pale. Your Honours, this meeting cannot have been coincidental. And around the time Kovač and Mladić met on the late afternoon of 13 July, there were over 7,000 Muslim men in Bosnian Serb custody, including 6,000 men from the column of men who had set out from Srebrenica on the night of 11 July. The site for that is P4945, page 1. Over 1,200 men were moved to Kravica warehouse, where they were murdered. And Your Honours, Karadžić must have been informed about the murders at Kravica warehouse almost immediately, just as he was about every other significant event during the Srebrenica operations. I refer to the defence argument at paragraphs 3031 to 38. On the night of 13 July, Kovač stayed at the Hotel Vidikovac in Zvornik. This was where the convoy of Muslim men stopped the following morning, 14 July, en route to detention and execution sites in Zvornik. This convoy was secured by the civilian police, Kovač's subordinates. That's paragraph 982 of the prosecution brief. Your Honours, what could Mladić and Kovač possibly have discussed when they met on the late afternoon of 13 July in Vlasenica? The murder operation. This is the only reasonable inference on the evidence, because within 1 or 2 hours of their meeting, within 1 or 2 hours of the Karadžić-Mladić phone call, both Karadžić and Mladić had given orders to move the Muslim men and boys from Bratunac to Zvornik, where they would be killed, from 14 to 16 July. The only reasonable inference you can draw is that Karadžić sent Kovač to the field to meet with Mladić, to collaborate about the murder operation, and then report back, which he did on the 14th July. You have direct evidence of Karadžić's order to Duronic to ensure the movement of prisoners to Zvornik, a phone call intercepted at 8:10 on the 13th July. First, Duronic told Karadžić that there were 2,000 men being held in Bratunac, and there'll be more during the night. Then Karadžić issued instructions via an intermediary in code. You can see it on the slide. All the goods must be placed inside the warehouses before 12 tomorrow. Not in the warehouses over there, but somewhere else. It's P6692, page 1, and in the prosecution brief at paragraphs 959 to 966. Now, Karadžić has conceded that this call took place, and in his final brief that this call was about prisoners. I refer to the defence brief at paragraph 3025 and 3280. Why did he have to use a euphemism to describe them? Why speak to Karadžić in code? Your Honours, this intercept is not evidence that Karadžić gave orders for Muslim prisoners to be taken to Batković camp. I refer you for this claim to paragraph 3280 of the defence final brief. The only inference available to you is that Karadžić was ordering Karadžić to ensure that prisoners were concealed inside detention facilities in Zvornik. This is consistent with Mladic's prior order to this effect, that's the prosecution brief, paragraph 955, and with what then happened. The first convoy of prisoners set off for Zvornik that night, and the rest the following morning. That night, Karadžić met with Karadžić's subordinates in the army and police, Bejara, who was Mladic's direct subordinate, and Vasic, who was Kovac's direct subordinate. Karadžić told Bejara about Karadžić's instructions that the prisoners had to be taken to Zvornik. Your Honours, the defence mischaracterises Nikolić's evidence about this meeting at paragraph 3039 of the defence brief. It is not the case that Bejara, quote, informed Karadžić of his plan to murder the prisoners, close quote. That's footnote 6398 of the defence brief. The fate of the prisoners was at this time certain. Bejara and Karadžić's discussion concerned where, not if, they would be killed. I refer to M. Nikolić at transcript reference 24678 and 24878. Your Honours, the ICRC did gain access to prisoners at Batković camp on the 26th of July. They registered only 164 Bosnian Muslim men from Srebrenica. That's the prosecution brief at paragraph 1046. On the 14th July in the morning, the convoy of prisoners stopped at the Hotel Vidikovac in Zvornik, where Kovac had stayed the night before. Then the convoy moved onwards, escorted and secured by the police and VRS to detention and execution sites in Zvornik. It's the prosecution brief paragraph 980 to 83. Kovac travelled to Bratunac and Srebrenica. He met Borovchanin, whose subordinates had murdered the prisoners at Kravitsa warehouse the day before, and Dragomir Vasic, chief of the Zvornik police, the CJB. That's the brief, paragraph 942. In parley, Karadžić issued a decision declaring a state of war in Srebrenica Skelani municipality. That's P4553 at paragraphs 988 to 91 of the prosecution brief. The purpose was to facilitate the use of civilian personnel and equipment by the army in the Bratunac and Zvornik areas for the murder and burial operations. At 12:40, Karadžić met Karadžić, whom he had appointed as the civilian commissioner of Srebrenica on 11 July. I refer to Karadžić's agenda, P2242 at page 91. Karadžić must have reported to him on the implementation of Karadžić's order, conveyed to him that Muslim prisoners were to be transported to Zvornik by midday that day. And in the late afternoon, early evening, Karadžić received a telephone call from a field commander. He was briefed about the column of Muslim men. The call was witnessed by prosecution witness Robert Đurđević. That's paragraph 1000 of the prosecution brief. Then Kovac returned to parley. He met Karadžić at 10:45 that night. Your Honours, the only reasonable inference is that Kovac briefed Karadžić about the significant events then ongoing in the Bratunac and Zvornik areas, about the murder operation, about the burials, and about the implementation of Karadžić's order to move the Muslim men and boys from Bratunac to Zvornik so that they could be killed there. That's the prosecution brief, paragraphs 943 to 948. That day, the organised murders in Zvornik began. Approximately 1,000 men at a Rahavats murdered. Approximately 1,000 men at Petkovci murdered. Your Honours, Karadžić's subordinates, including Mladic and the police, the MUP, and Doronic, kept Karadžić informed of every significant step in the progress of the Srebrenica operations. During the attack, upon the day of Srebrenica's fall, upon the removal of the population, upon the detention of thousands of Muslim prisoners, upon the movement of prisoners to Zvornik to be murdered, and it didn't stop there. On the following day, 15 July, at 10 a.m., Bayara was intercepted talking to Karadžić. He said, it's P5074, page 1, "I don't know what to do, I mean it. There are still 3,500 parcels that I have to distribute." Your Honour, parcels was another euphemism for prisoners. Bayara was explaining that he still had 3,500 prisoners to kill. On 16 July, when the murders of over 1,000 men at Branjevo farm were underway, Milenko Karadžić, chief of the Public Security Department of the police, travelled to Zvornik. He reported from there to Karadžić that the Zvornik brigade commander, that's Panđurović, had negotiated a ceasefire with the Muslim army and a temporary corridor to allow the column of Muslim men safe passage to Muslim-held territory. Karadžić called the main staff. He was concerned because this appeared to be a deviation from the plan to kill the men. The main staff had to get his permission, his approval. That's D2002 and P5076. Prosecution brief, paragraph 1002 to 1011.
What permission do you mean there? Permission from the president to do what?
To approve a change in course. There was a murder operation underway, but opening the corridor meant that some men, some Muslim men and boys, would be allowed to escape.
Yes, I may come back to that, but please continue.
Karadžić had the power of life or death over the Bosnian Muslim men of Srebrenica. He did not exercise it on the 16th July to stop the murders. He called his subordinates to find out why some Muslim men were allowed to escape. You'll recall later on the 6th of August, when the whole world knew about the mass executions, Karadžić expressed his only regret in relation to Srebrenica, that 9,000 men were allowed to escape. He said, 9,000 armed Turks in the mountains, in the woods. That was an airborne division. 9,000 people, that's an airborne assault. And in the end, several thousand fighters did manage to get through. We were not able to encircle the enemy and destroy them because we rushed into Žepa. That's P1412, page 17. This statement is evidence of his genocidal intent. Your Honours, Karadžić controlled access to the Zvornik and Bratunac crime scenes, but he kept the international community out so that the murders could proceed to their full conclusion unchecked That's the prosecution brief, paragraphs 1022 to 26 and 1034 to 1039. On 17 July, he pardoned a small group of Bosnian Muslim men remaining in Potocari. After the last of the women and children were removed from the enclave, after the men and boys were murdered between 13 and 16 July, not for any reasons of humanity, but to deflect international attention from the enclave. Your Honours, this is one of the, quotes, exemplary orders to which Karadžić refers at paragraph 3127 of his final brief. He refers to P4390. On 17 July, when over 7,000 Muslim men were dead and buried, Karadžić went on CNN. The interviewer, David Frost, asked Karadžić about the Muslim men. We can see a clip.
What about the figures we've read in the media, your favourite area, in the media about 15,000 men missing, unaccounted for, from Srebrenica, and that you have got them somewhere? That's what we read. That's
even yesterday and today we have opened our own lines, and many of them have entered Muslim territory. Many of them have been combatants, and our local commander has allowed them to pass through our territory, and they are passing even tonight. Many of them are in the forests, and they are trying to get Muslim-controlled territory, and we are not interfering. We don't want to fight with them because they do not intend to take our territory. They want to leave our territory.
That's P5235, pages 2 to 3 of the transcript. You heard, Karadžić said of the missing Muslim men, many of them are in the forests and they are trying to get to Muslim-controlled territory. He lied, of course, but he didn't say to David Frost, the Muslim men are in Baković camp, like I ordered on the 13th July when I spoke to my subordinate, Karadžić, in code. Why not, Your Honours? Because that is his case. I refer to the defence brief, paragraph 3280. Well, the answer is plain, because he knew they were dead. He had approved and authorised their murders. Now, he says he didn't know about the concerns expressed by the international community, or he says he didn't believe the allegations. I refer to the defence brief, paragraphs 3129 to 3142. Your Honours, the prosecution has addressed the extent to which Karadžić engaged with the international press in the prosecution brief, paragraphs 1026, 1037 to 39, and 1081 to 83. Karadžić was aware of the allegations and concerns of the international community. We saw that in the interview with David Frost on the 17th July. I refer you also to the prosecution brief, paragraphs 1025, 1043 to 46, 1071 to 74, and 1080 to 83.
Pausing there, because I find this part somewhat very important. I'd like to make it sure. With respect to that assembly transcript, P1412, page 17, during the opening statement, Mr. Tigard said that Mr. Karadžić was angry about this column's escape. And now you said he was regretful, he expressed regrets, but which was not present in your final brief, that expression. So could you expand, where did you get that opinion that Mr. Karadžić was angry or regretful about that column's escape? What is your basis?
From the language that is used, to say the only statement that is made concerning the thousands of Muslim men of Srebrenica is that's an airborne division. 9,000 of them got through, and then they came back in a division. We were not able to encircle the enemy and destroy them. It's clearly, regret, same meaning as anger. That, when I say regret, I mean this was his only expression after the Srebrenica events, any expression of emotion. It was the anger, the regret that some Muslim men were allowed to escape in the corridor that Panđurović opened. And that would be just on the basis of the language that is used in this assembly session.
In his speech at that assembly, he said, we were not able to surround and destroy that enemy. So destroying enemy per se would not amount to genocidal intent.
Well, he's not going to say in the assembly session, we were not able, as we did with the other 7,000, to summarily execute them and bury them in mass graves. So this is evidence of his genocidal intent because it demonstrates that he was angry that some got away. So he knew that everyone else had been murdered, and this is evidence that his statement of regret, of anger, that not every single one of these Muslim men and boys were murdered. His intent was to eliminate the Bosnian Muslim population by killing all the men and boys. These men were allowed to escape, and that angered him.
Thank you. Could we upload Exhibit P5076, intercept between the main staff and Palma that you referred to? While we are waiting for that, you also referred to Exhibit D2002, where it was noted Mr. Karadžić called the main staff, and then where it says like that. The president called a short while ago and said that he had been informed by Karadžić that Panđurović has arranged passage for the Muslim over to that territory.
Yes.
In light of that, I have some trouble interpreting a couple of lines at the beginning of this intercept. Here the main staff people says, I have to get permission from the main boss, from the main head of state. So you referred to this, and then I said I would come back to this. Knowing that the column already passed to the territory, what kind of permission do they need on the part of the main staff?
Well, we see in the sequence of events at that time, in the intercepts, that there is the main staff is sending Popović down to talk to Panđurović, that Karadžić is in the area, he finds out what happens before. It seems that the main staff is aware, the information gets to Karadžić, he responds, he gets in touch with the main staff. Clearly there is a need to find out what is going on in the Zvornik area and to ensure that there is approval, because this is a change. Like 9 July, Ptolemir had proposed, the main staff proposed to Karadžić attack on the town because the conditions were right. Karadžić gave his approval. That was a change in the military operation under the Krivaya 95 attack order, took it further, take over the town. His approval was required, just as it was on the 9th July, just as it was when there was any significant decision during the course of these Srebrenica operations.
So was this permission not related to the column?
Yes, this specifically related to allowing the column through. Clearly the head of state calls and wants to know what's going on because he's been informed almost in real time but relatively soon by Karadžić, because Karadžić has been with Panđurović. He's been with Panđurović in Zvornik. We heard that evidence. So he has first-hand information which he communicates to Karadžić. We know it was accurate because we saw Vasic's reports around the same time. We know that Karadžić had the ability to call Karadžić, that the call was in fact made, that Karadžić received this information. He was getting information via his various information streams, his reporting chains, and upon receiving this information, and it seems before the main staff were fully aware of what was going on, he then responded to that information, getting straight in touch with the main staff. Which is is how we describe it in the prosecution brief at paragraph 1002 to 1011. These actions were superficially seen to deviate, from the plan to murder. Panđurović didn't have the approval of Karadžić and or the VRS main staff. So efforts were made to contact Panđurović by everyone because Karadžić's approval was needed.
Yes, I will leave it at that. Thank you, Ms. Park.
Thank you.
Please continue.
I'm just going to have a look on the transcripts here where I was. I've now lost myself. Yes, I was going to move on to the exemplary orders. Your Honour, I'm going to address the three specific claims I mentioned at the outset. Karadžić's orders were exemplary. This is the claim at paragraph 3127 of the defence brief. He lists 7 decisions or orders at paragraph 3127. Your Honours, there is nothing exemplary about these orders. The first 5 are addressed in the prosecution brief. The 9 July order, P2276, is dealt with at paragraphs 876 to 79. It's the order to attack Srebrenica town. The 11 July decisions, D2055 and P2994, are at paragraphs 900 to 908. These are the decisions setting up Serb civilian structures in Srebrenica. Karadžić appointed a veteran ethnic cleanser, his subordinate Doronic, to deal with the Muslim civilians. He didn't intend, when he accompanied these orders with instructions to adhere to international humanitarian law, that international law be actually observed by his subordinates. And it wasn't. This was simulated adherence to international law. I refer to the prosecution brief at paragraphs 879 to 902. The same applies to Karadžić's 14 July decision, P4553. This is the declaration of a state of war. I've discussed it. It's dealt with at paragraphs 988 to 991 of the prosecution brief. The pardoning of Muslim local staff in Potocari, the defence refers to P4390, is dealt with at paragraphs 1030 to 1033 of the prosecution brief. Karadžić relies upon 2 further orders. The first, P4967, is dated 22nd July. It's at footnote 6510 of the defence brief. 22nd July, after the Bosnian Muslim population were forcibly removed. It should be read in context with prosecution exhibit P4966. Then you will see that it is about the theft of food and equipment from the UN base at Potocari, after the UN had left, Karadžić said he would get an order from Karadžić to deal with the problem, and he did so almost immediately. That's what P4967 and P4966 shows. The second order is P4968. It's footnote 6511 of the defence brief. It's dated 24th July 1995, again after the Muslim population was forcibly removed from Srebrenica. It relates to the passage of humanitarian convoys to Muslims in Karadžić, not Srebrenica, and not for any reasons of humanity, but to ensure the passage of humanitarian aid to Serbs in other areas and to stop NATO forces bombing VRS positions. This document shows that Karadžić was in direct telephone contact with Karadžić, and that when an order came from Karadžić, the army was expected to obey. Under threat of prosecution, that's what this document says. We will take disciplinary measures against, it goes on, and prosecute all those who disrupt the fulfillment of Drina Corps obligations. The second specific claim, Your Honours, I was going to deal with. Karadžić says he didn't know anything because the written reports that reached him made no reference to the execution of prisoners from Srebrenica. That's the defence brief at paragraphs 3083 to 85 and 3091 to 3107. He brought witnesses to confirm his innocence of all knowledge. Witnesses like Karadžić, Tolomir, and Gordan Milanic, liars, genocidaires, and noxious devotees. Your Honours, we have described the official and unofficial reporting chains to Karadžić in the prosecution brief, paragraphs 843 to 854. Let me repeat the prosecution's point. Karadžić was kept informed during the Srebrenica operations by telephone and in-person contacts with his subordinates in the army, police, and local civilian authorities. And these telephone and in-person contacts were supplemented by written reports. The main staff reported to Karadžić in writing about prisoners. I refer to the prosecution brief at paragraph 852. On 12 July, Karadžić was informed that the VRS and MOOP units had, quote, organised ambushes in order to destroy Muslim extremists who have not surrendered, close quotes. That's P3054, pages 3 to 4. On the 13th July, Karadžić was informed that Muslim men had surrendered in large numbers, in quotes. That's P4464, page 3. On 14 July, Karadžić was informed that Drina Corps units were, quote, scouring the terrain, close quotes, and taking, quote, a large number of Muslim fugitives, quotes, prisoner. That's P4457, page 3. On the basis only of these written reports, Karadžić knew about prisoners in large numbers. Where did he think they all went? Batković camp? Karadžić says he had no reason to know in mid-August that a significant number of Muslim men and boys had been executed. I refer to the defence final brief at paragraph 3111. But he received a report from the State Commission for Exchange of POWs, dated the 12th of August 1995, which said that there were no more than a few hundred Muslim men from Srebrenica at Batković camp. That's P4975, pages 2 to 3. And I refer to the prosecution final brief, paragraph 1047, and that's footnote 3782. And indeed, between August and the end of December 1995, only 170 Muslim men from Bakovic camp were exchanged. That's P5440. If truly innocent of the Srebrenica crimes, why did Karadžić not raise the alarm in August 1995? Where were the men and boys of Srebrenica? Why didn't Karadžić then order an investigation? Your Honours, next I'll deal with what the defence says about when the plan to kill emerged. I refer to the defence final brief paragraphs 2449 to 2518. Karadžić seeks to shift responsibility for the murders at Kravica warehouse and even the killings in Zvornik upon Muslim prisoners who he says attempted a, quote, mutiny at Kravica warehouse and triggered the massacre of over 1,000 men. I refer to the defence brief 2450 and 51 and 2518. Your Honours, there were organised killings on the 13th July at Yarda River, Kravica warehouse, Sandici meadow, and related to Lucas School near Tishcha. These organised killings are described in the Srebrenica narrative. It's Appendix D, paragraphs 49 to 79. We've explained why they were carried out in furtherance of the joint criminal enterprise to eliminate. We've explained why the murders at Kravica warehouse were premeditated, organised, and committed in furtherance of that plan. I'm not going to repeat the arguments. They're in the brief. All of the evidence points to the existence of a plan to murder the Muslim men and boys of Srebrenica, which was being implemented in Potocari from the moment the men and boys were separated from their family members on the 12th July. We deal with this in the Srebrenica narrative, the paragraphs 14, 19 to 23, and 25 to 27. This is what Momir Nikolic was told would happen in his conversations with Popovic, Kosaric, and Yankovic on the morning of 12 July. These conversations are described in the prosecution brief, the paragraphs 916 to 919. I won't repeat the detail. And Your Honours, this is what did happen. The defence brief does not raise any reasonable doubt on this issue. I'll address 4 topics. The first relates to the organised killings at Yarda River. The second relates to an intercept upon which the defence relies. The last 2 relate to the separations of Muslim men and boys. First, Your Honours, the Yarda River killings. The defence argues that you cannot convict or make a factual finding on the basis of KDZ 065's evidence about the executions at Yarda River on the 13th July. That's the defence final brief at paragraphs 2494 to 2495. We have addressed the Yarda River killings and the respects in which KDZ 065's evidence is corroborated in the Srebrenica narrative, paragraphs 49 to 53. I also refer you to paragraphs 39 to 40 of the Srebrenica narrative. We, in any event, say that the defence evidence does not displace the adjudicated facts related to this incident because not credible or reliable. And Your Honours, the defence only puts an adjudicated fact into question when it introduces, quote, reliable and credible evidence to the contrary, close quotes. I refer you to paragraph 42 of the Appeals Chamber's 16 June 2006 decision on the prosecutor's interlocutory appeal of decision on judicial notice in the Karamera case. And Your Honours, we have discussed the defence evidence in the Srebrenica narrative and in the defence witness credibility charts, that's Appendix F, at pages 184 and 194 to 195. Your Honours, if you find, however, that the adjudicated facts for the Yarda River killings have been displaced, and you find that KDZ 065's evidence is not corroborated as we say it is, then we move to your question 8, as forecast by Mr. Teager and raised by the defence brief. And I'll read the question for the record. What is the prosecution's position with regard to the use of uncorroborated Rule 92 bis evidence for the purposes of making factual findings? Now, in answering the question, I refer to the defence brief, paragraph 2494, on the topic of Yarda River. It is right to say that the trial chamber in the Blagojevich case declined to make a factual finding on the basis of uncorroborated 92 bis evidence. This was in relation to the scheduled killings at Yarda River. However, there is ICTY authority for the proposition that the chamber may rely on a pattern of similar events or linked events as corroboration sufficient to sustain a conviction. And I refer specifically in advancing this argument to the Yarda River killings. In particular, I refer you as authority to the Kupreshkic appeals judgment at paragraphs 321 to 322. The appeals chamber held that pattern evidence can provide corroboration for other forms of evidence led at trial. This approach accords with the Stakic appeals chamber's approval of a conviction on the charge of killing 77 Croats in Brishevo, in circumstances where the only evidence supporting the finding was admitted under Rule 92 bis. As here, the incident in Stakic was one of many killings underlying the convictions for the counts of extermination, murder, and persecution. I refer you to paragraph 201 of that judgment. Your Honours, you can and you should make a similar factual finding in relation to the scheduled incident at Yarda River. The executions at Yarda River on 13 July were analogous to the other organised killings that occurred that same day at the Kravitzer Warehouse, Sandici Meadow and Lucas School. The organised killings all contained the same shared elements. The perpetrators were Bosnian Serb forces. The victims were Bosnian Muslims. The killings involved coordination by VRS and MOOP forces. Buses were used to transport victims to execution sites, and the killings occurred within the context of the murder operation. The similarities in the sequence of these killings and evidence that they are all linked serve to corroborate KDZ 065's account. That was the submission on that question as it relates to Yarda River. Second, on the topic of the plan to kill, which I'm now on, the defence refers to an intercept. It's D2197. That's at paragraph 2468 of the defence final brief. This intercept notes that Beara said at 11:25 on the 13th July that the prisoners will be sent to Batkovic. It's not consistent with Beara's true intentions. The prisoners were not sent to Batkovic. Beara was by then a willing participant in the joint criminal enterprise to eliminate. In a conversation intercepted over an hour earlier, at 10:09, he issued instructions about the detention of Muslim men at Konjevic Polje. And told that Muslim men were killing themselves, said, "Excellent, just let them continue. Fuck it." That's D2204, page 2, and P5354 at page 3. Your Honours, I'll deal with the last two issues together. The defence brief says, first, that there were efforts to screen and register prisoners, which shows that the existence of a plan to kill from 12 July is not the only reasonable inference to be drawn on the evidence. Second, that there was no evidence of systematic confiscation of identification documents. I refer to paragraphs 2470 to 2479 and 2511 of the defence final brief. Your Honours, there was no genuine screening process. I refer to the Srebrenica narrative, paragraph 22. Young boys, children, were separated from their family members in Potocari. This is Rutten's testimony. He said boys as young as 12 were separated. That's at P3948, paragraph 49, and transcript reference 22040 and 22046. And it is Kingori's testimony. That's at P4140, paragraphs 170 to 171. Your Honours, I also refer you to the evidence of Shera Ibišević, P401, page 8, Samila Salčinović at P404, page 13. There was no effort, apart from at Nova Kasaba, which I'll come to record the identities of the Muslim prisoners who were taken into custody. There is evidence of the systematic confiscation of identification documents, and identification documents were destroyed. On 12 July, Buring saw IDs and passports scattered in the corner at the White House in Potocari. That's at P3969, pages 122 to 123 and 183. On 13 July, Rutten saw piles of ID cards and passports lying on the floor outside the White House. That's at P3948, paragraphs 55, 63 and 89. He said children as young as 12 were forced at gunpoint to abandon their IDs. That's transcript 22040. He watched as the belongings and identification documents of Muslim men and boys were burned on the evening of 13 July. That's at P3948, paragraph 66, and transcript 22041 to 42, and P3961. On the 12th July, Kingori saw that the men were forced to leave their identification cards. That's at P4140, paragraphs 173 to 174, and transcript 22813. He said it meant a lot. Quotes, "This was an indicator that something bad was going to happen." That's at P4140, paragraph 175. There is evidence of the systematic removal of ID cards outside Potocari. In Bratinats town, I refer to the evidence of KDZ 039. It's P3940 at page 28. At Konjevich Polje, on the 13th July, I refer to the evidence of KDZ 065. That's P336, pages 12 to 13. And KDZ 045, that's transcript 22639, 22679 to 80, and 22685. Karadžić relies upon the evidence of two survivors. This is at paragraph 2511 of the defence brief. One, KDZ 039, had his identification documents removed in Bratinats. I've already referred to his evidence. The other, KDZ 167, didn't have his identification documents removed in Potocari or in Bratinats. That's true. He had also left his identification at home. The reference is P354, pages 73 to 74. Your Honours, I mentioned Nova Kasaba earlier. Mladic told prisoners at Nova Kasaba on the 13th July they would be exchanged. They were not criminals. They would go to Bratinats for lunch. He would organise groups to collect the wounded in the woods, for the dead to be buried where their families wanted them to be buried. And in that context, he ordered his soldiers to make a list of prisoners. A camera was filming him as he said this. Then his soldiers kicked and hit a prisoner with rifle butts. One shot him dead with a pistol. Mladic didn't react. Karadžić relies upon this evidence, Mladic's merciless lies, to show that there was no plan to kill the men. It does not. I refer to the defence final brief at paragraph 2474 and the Srebrenica narrative at paragraph 43. Adjudicated fact 1623 and the evidence of KDZ 333 at P4342, pages 10 to 11. Two final points on the topic of the separations. First, Karadžić relies upon a list of 387 suspected war criminals dated the 12th July as evidence that there was a genuine screening process and therefore no plan to kill the men. I refer to the defence final brief, paragraph 2473 and D1957. This is not an inference you can make on the basis of this list. If there was a genuine screening process, why were all of the men and boys who were separated in Potocari taken to Bratinats? The reference is E. Rave at 22181. Second, Karadžić relies upon the evidence that Resid Sinanovic was questioned as a war crimes suspect. I refer to the defence brief at paragraph 2476. And that Bejara told Zlatan Celanovic on 12 July to find out if there were any suspected war criminals in custody. I refer to the defence brief, paragraph 2477. Your Honours, Sinanovic was on the list to which the defence refers. That's D1957. He appears at line 121. On 13 July, he was questioned by Zlatan Celanovic, the Bratinats Brigade legal officer. Celanovic found that there were no grounds for detaining him or bringing criminal charges against him. And the reference is P377, pages 10 to 12 for Celanovic, and M. Nikolic at transcript 24658 to 59. But Sinanovic wasn't released from custody, as you would expect if this was a genuine screening process. He was detained in Bratinats. Then he was sent to Zvornik. He escaped the executions at Kozluk. He fled over the River Drina. He was rearrested and taken back to Zvornik. And then he was murdered at Branjevo Farm or the Pilitsa Cultural Centre on the 16th July. We give this account in the Srebrenica narrative at paragraphs 85 to 88. Apart from a group of 5 to 7 prisoners who were brought in at the same time as Sinanovic, Celanovic interrogated no one else in Bratinats. That's P377, pages 8 to 9, page 13, 20 to 21, and page 76. If there is any doubt in your mind about the purpose of the separations of Muslim men and boys in Potocari, let me remind you of the evidence of a mother from Srebrenica known in this courtroom as KDZ 265. KDZ 265 lost her husband and 2 of her sons. She described when her 14-year-old son was taken from her in Potocari. She said they had to walk through a kind of gauntlet. Then when they were halfway through, someone said, "Popovic, look out for this one." He was referring to her son. She whispered to her son, "Don't worry, sonny, just go, keep going." Then one of the soldiers jumped out and told her son to go to the left side. Her son said, "Why me? I was born in 1981. Then she testified of her son. He had some kind of bags in his hand, and the soldier told him to throw the bag to the right side and to go to the left. But I grabbed him by his hand, and he kept repeating, "I was born in 1981. What will you do with me? What do you want me to do?" And then I begged them, I pleaded with them. "Why are you taking him? He was born in 1981. But he repeated his order, and I held him so hard, but he grabbed him. And then my son threw out that bag, and the soldier picked up the bag and threw it on a pile on the right-hand side, and he took my son's hand, and he dragged him to the left side. And he turned around, and then he told me, "Mummy, please, can you get that bag for me? Could you please get it for me?" She said, that was the last time I heard his voice. That's P367, pages 13 to 15. Your Honours, the evidence of the separation of children is sufficient to determine that there was no genuine screening process in Potocari. Now, Your Honours, I was going to move on to the response on the numbers. Turn to Karadžić's argument on the numbers of Bosnian Muslim men who were executed. It's paragraphs 2519 to 2702 of the defence brief. Your Honours, the defence fails to consider the totality of the evidence. The prosecution case on the numbers of men who were murdered is based on the evidence of witnesses, intercepts, and documents corroborated by the forensic and demographic evidence. I refer you to the prosecution brief at paragraphs 916 to 1066 and the Srebrenica narrative at paragraphs 14 to 173. This evidence must be considered in its totality, not piecemeal. The defence argument is confused and speculative. It is not supported by the evidence in this case. It examines the forensic and demographic evidence in isolation. Karadžić argues uncertainty around the total number of Srebrenica victims when there is none. Karadžić's principal arguments are that the bodies of execution and combat victims are, quotes, commingled in the Srebrenica-related graves, and that the number of Srebrenica victims isn't capable of determination. He says nowhere close to 7,000. The site is paragraph 2700. I refer to the defence brief at paragraph 2698 to 2702. I'll deal with the first claim, commingling of bodies. The witness testimony, contemporaneous documents, intercepts, and forensic evidence taken together demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt that all of the Srebrenica-related primary and secondary graves contain exclusively the bodies of Srebrenica-related execution victims, apart from 3 sites at Glogova, Bilječeva, and Lipje 8. Now, the mixed contents of Glogova and Bilječeva were explained by Dušan Janc, and the reference for that is Janc, his testimony at 27016 and 27017, and 27040 to 46 and 27060. And Janc didn't include the bodies in Lipje 8 within the numbers in his report. And that's the reference for that is his report, which is P4772, the public version. We have explained why no combat casualties were buried in the graves, and that's in the Srebrenica narrative, paragraphs 164 to 168. As we have explained, the conclusion that the graves contain execution victims exclusively is consistent with and overwhelmingly supported by the forensic evidence. First, the prosecution's forensic experts did not see any evidence that the bodies exhumed from the Srebrenica graves, related graves, died in combat. Second, the prosecution's archaeologists saw no evidence that the Srebrenica-related graves had either been created on the site of existing sites or subsequently reopened. Third, the cause and manner of death of the bodies from each of the primary and secondary grave sites supports the witness evidence of the executions at each of these sites. I refer to the Srebrenica narrative. Fourth, there were blindfolds and ligatures in the graves associated with Rahavats, Petkovci, Kozluk, and Branjevic. I refer to the Srebrenica narrative, footnote 699, and the defense brief, paragraphs 2585, 2639, 2685, and 2687. Fifth, some graves contain artifacts linking their contents to the specific site where the prisoners were killed. I refer, for example, to the Srebrenica narrative, paragraphs 63 and 104, about Kravitsa Warehouse and Rahavats. Sixth, there is no credible evidence that the secondary graves contain any bodies other than those of victims from the primary graves. I refer to the claims at paragraphs 2605 to 8 of the defense brief. Karadžić ignores all of the linkage between the primary and the secondary graves, apart from the DNA linkage. That evidence includes soil, pollen, other artifacts, as well as the evidence from witnesses and documents about the reburial operation itself. I refer to the Srebrenica narrative, paragraphs 63, 103 to 104, 112, 123, and 142, and the prosecution brief, paragraphs 1057 to 1066. Your Honours, I was going to move on to another point, so perhaps now is a good time.
Yes, when we come back, can I hear your response to the defense assertion in their final brief paragraphs from 2549 to 56, pages 674 and 675. Yes, Mr. Tiga.
Mr. President, may I use this opportunity to make two brief corrections now that we've received yesterday's transcript? So at T47-670, I referred to page 87 of the defense brief. I should have cited paragraph 787. And at page 47687, I cited to D105, and I should have cited to D1055. Thank you.
We'll resume at 3:20.
All rise, veuillez vous lever.